So good afternoon, I think it is by now, to everyone. As Nicola said, I'm Terry Ann Priel. I'm with the EU Delegation Office in Ottawa. I too would like to thank Nicola and colleagues at the French Embassy, as well as Garth Williams and his colleagues from Eracan for, it was a fun project, I think, fun working groups trying to put this all together. We had a similar event already in Vancouver on Saturday, and I understand that that too was a success. So thank you, Nicola, and thank you to everyone for coming. Today, I will try not to be too long. I'll probably give you a bit of a background on what it is we do at the delegation in terms of trying to bring this whole thing together. I heard a few of the presentations earlier. It's very clear that our EU-Canada cooperation programs in mobility, particularly, and especially the Erasmus Mundus program that Hélène gave a presentation on this morning, as well as some of the other speakers, they're a success. We've heard also from the students who've experienced it. It's not a bad thing. And I thought maybe my presentation should have come earlier, but I'm doing it now. So, but just to wrap everything together to say why it is that the European Union thought of these programs in the first place. Why do we cooperate with the countries that we do, particularly industrialized countries, how the funding mechanisms sort of work, and what is the thinking behind all of these policies. So that's who I am, and of course, you know, for each of our presentations, we have to have a nice introductory first page, so that's that one. So here we are on our EU education policy. It sort of focuses on those 4 points that I've introduced there. I'm very sorry that you probably can't see the first 3 very clearly. I'll read them for you. Focus on lifelong learning and mobility. Improving the quality and efficiency of education and training, promoting equity, social cohesion, and active citizenship, as well as enhancing creativity and innovation, including entrepreneurship at all levels of education and training. In Europe, as well as here in Canada, leaders have accepted and have acted upon the truth that education and lifelong learning opportunities for citizens are essential to the development of a competitive society and economy. While education within the EU is a member state competence, and I think I could probably try to make a link between what also happens here in Canada in that it's for the provinces. Right, so in the EU, education policy is a member state competence, which means that it's each member state's government that's responsible for how they disseminate that sort of information. However, lifelong learning policies and programs at the European Union level are under the responsibility of the European Commission's Directorate General for Education and Culture, so the EU's Ministry of Education, as you might wish to call it. Those lifelong learning policies are designed to support national actions and help address common challenges such as aging societies, skills deficits among the workforce, and global competition. Very similar to what happens here in Canada. Within the EU, several strategies underline that knowledge and the innovation that it brings are the EU's most valuable assets, particularly in light of increasing global competition. Finally, in a general sense on EU education policy, there's a strong emphasis on mobility and cooperation beyond the borders of the EU. And in the next 2 years, in 2013, the plan is that the European Union will propose a separate strategy on internationalization with a focus on support for the EU higher education sector in creating more knowledge and innovation by engaging internationally and particularly with industrialized countries like Canada. So my impression, not a promise, but my impression is that in the 2 years or so from now, Erasmus Mundus will be bigger and better. I think those of you who know a bit more about it have understood that it started out only as a program within Europe. Then it went beyond borders, and then it was limited to a master's program. Now it's including third country participation at the doctoral level. So it's improving and getting larger and larger. So, as I had mentioned, a huge part of the education policy within the European Union is enhancing external relations. The new EU's External Action Service, of which I am now proudly a part, 9 months ago, I was with the European Commission. Today, I'm with the European External Action Service, but I haven't changed my office. So with the establishment of the EEAS, as we call it, international cooperation on education and training has been highlighted as one of the main pillars of international relations and collaboration with third countries. The EEAS, External Action Service, has highlighted 4 main goals for the European Union: the support for modernization in non-EU countries, promotion of common values between different peoples and cultures, advancement of the EU as a focal point center for excellence, and finally, improvement of EU human resources through mutual learning and exchange of good practice. Of course, to support all of these objectives, there are a number of programs promoting exchanges and cooperation, those we've discussed today. Some I'll also tell you a little bit more about in a few minutes. The most widely known and maybe one of the most successful programs in Europe right now for mobility and exchanges is Erasmus Mundus. And as you've heard, it offers students from around the world the opportunity to study for a master's or a doctorate degree at an EU university. Tempus is another program which is not one of the cooperations with third countries, and it supports the modernization of higher education bodies and systems in the EU countries as well as within the EU neighborhood. The Tempus program funds both partnerships between EU and non-EU institutions, allowing them to learn from best practice and structural measures. And of course, another program that comes under the enhancement of external relations is the Bologna process, which has fostered an increase in the mobility of teachers, promotion of mutual recognition of qualifications, and opportunities to share the expertise in areas of and lifelong learning. Some of the other areas where the EU enhances external relations is through the EU 2020 strategy. I'll tell you a bit about that in a moment, including some programs announced by the European Commission, such as the New Skills for New Jobs, the Youth on the Move, and the internationalization of EU higher education. So the EU 2020 strategy, as well as New Skills for New Jobs initiative. Huge flagship program on which we're basing the next 10 years of development in this area within the EU. It includes 5 targets for employment, for research and development and innovation, for climate change and energy, and of course for education, reducing school dropout rates to below 10%, and at least 40% of 30 to 34-year-olds should be completing tertiary education. So, and the 5th target area for the 2020 strategy is poverty or social exclusion, in that at least 20 million fewer people in or at risk of poverty and social exclusion should be achieved between now and the next 10 years. The New Skills for New Jobs is also part of the European 2020 strategy and is the Commission's contribution to reaching the EU employment rate target for women and men of 75% for the 20 to 64 age group by 2020. The strategy highlights the EU's targets to reduce early school leaving rate to under 10% and increase the number of young people in higher education or equivalent vocational education to at least 40%. And I'll move very quickly to the Youth on the Move initiative. This one is also relatively new, was announced in 2009 under the Swedish presidency, so they were quite proud of that. It was a proposal announced by President Barroso at that time, where EU youth ministers adopted a new framework for cooperation in the field of youth from 2010 until 2018. The European Council later adopted a resolution on a renewed framework for the same area for cooperation in youth for the next decade. Member states, together with the Commission, have agreed to work closely to provide more and more and better opportunities for EU youth. The resolution has 2 overall objectives: more and equal opportunities for young people in education and the labor market, and active citizenship and social inclusion and solidarity of young people. So I'll move next to the other pillar of external relations within the European Union with regard to higher education, and it is, of course, the internationalization strategy. Here, according to the OECD's policy brief of about 5 or so years ago, over the last decade, and in particular, in the last 5 years, I believe is what the brief had mentioned, higher education has become increasingly international as more and more students choose to study abroad. Not new, this is what we've discussed already here today. And students enroll in foreign educational programs and institutions in their home country, or they simply use the internet to take courses at colleges or universities in other countries. Strategies employed by Europe, bolstered by the Bologna process and the standardization of university offerings, have been clearly successful. A recent study commissioned by the Directorate General for Education and Culture has found that Europe is an increasingly attractive study destination for foreign students, whether they're from Europe or from different parts of the world, and that every second foreign student in the world studies in Europe. So you guys are 2 out of 4. That's what that would mean. The study found 3 key things: that Europe is becoming more and more attractive as a study destination, that Erasmus and Erasmus Mundus plays a very important role in supporting student mobility in the European context, and that the number of foreign students in the 32 countries that were studied grew tremendously between 1988, 89, and 2006 to 2007. Incidentally, the 32 countries that were used in the study were the EU 27 and Turkey, Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein. Now, I will move quickly to cooperation with industrialized countries. At the bottom of this slide, you can see who we cooperate with, mainly the industrialized countries. These countries are Australia, Canada, Japan, New Zealand, South Korea, and the USA. Agreements with these countries give support to consortia of higher education and training institutions working together to improve their educational services, to compare and modernize curricula, and to develop joint study programs with recognition of credits and qualifications. These programs include regional and bilateral cooperation projects based on joint EU partner countries' funding and mutual agreement on the selection of higher education partnerships. And so cooperation with Canada. Bilateral relations and shared objectives is what underpins many of the subjects of our dialogue and why it is that we cooperate with Canada, particularly in higher education and training. Shared objectives, obviously, we all want to make sure that our higher education systems are compatible and also quite competitive in today's economy. There are the shared challenges as well. Immigration is one of them. Aging societies, and of course now the big challenge is this economic challenges on the global front. And certainly we both want to enhance mutual understanding and learning. So these are some of the main reasons why we have embarked on this higher education and cooperation. Education is an important area of cooperation between Canada and the EU, as evidenced by more than 2,300 active bilateral agreements. In 1995, the European Commission made a first formal agreement with Canada on cooperation in higher education and vocational training. It aims to promote understanding between the people of the EU and Canada and to improve the quality of their human resource development. The current agreement is meant to last until 2013. Successive renewed agreements have led to European and Canadian funding for projects on international curriculum development and student exchange activities with jointly designed courses, including vocational training, etc., etc. The agreement complements the activities of the network of EU Centers of Excellence. I'll talk a bit about that in a moment, in Canadian universities, as well as the European Network for Canadian Studies Centers and Associations. To date, 107 transatlantic consortia have been funded, involving 765 EU and Canadian higher education and training institutions, with more than 5,600 students who have participated in transatlantic exchanges. So you see, it's a program that continues to grow, as I had mentioned earlier. Notwithstanding the challenges of lodging and, maybe trying to adapt to different circumstances and university cultures, that sort of thing, we still have quite a large interest in these programs, and especially the transatlantic exchange programs. From an EU perspective, it has always been, though unfortunately, almost double the number of European students are coming to Canada than Canadians that go to Europe. So this is something that seminars like this one we're hoping to address through this. I was very interested in hearing some of the answers earlier about how it is that students found out about Erasmus Mundus and that sort of thing. I'm going to say something maybe that I shouldn't, but there's a lot of competition, not only between Canadian universities, I'm sure the academics in the room can relate to that, but obviously between universities of different countries. And so we find, and I repeat, I shouldn't say this, but I'm saying it, it's quite possible that some of these programs are pushed only depending on who the professors are. I've heard this myself as the experience of some of the students, and we're looking to see how else we can probably promote the program, because as you can see, there are many students who've never heard about it and who would very easily qualify. For most of the Canadian students that apply, they're successful, which means that the level of learning and their level of qualification is commensurate with what is needed for these programs. So this is hopefully, again, thanks to Nicola and to the other colleagues for putting on an event like this, we're trying to send the word out. Other cooperation programs that we have with Canada, these are just dates for people who like dates. When we had the first agreement, when it was renewed, the external evaluation of the agreement to show how successful it has been, joint declaration in 2005, then another agreement that was renewed in 2006, which is going to expire in 2013. So these are the other cooperation programs that we have with Canada. Erasmus Mundus we've talked about already. The Jean Monnet program, I'll give you a bit of information on that in a moment. EU Centers of Excellence, which are housed within universities throughout Canada. The Public Diplomacy Initiative, which is also a very popular program funded by the new financial policy instrument within the European Commission, as well as the EU Canada Young Journalist Award, which is a much smaller project that's managed by the delegation in Ottawa. So for EU Centers of Excellence, I'll start with the Jean Monnet program. Managed by the Department of Education and Culture. It supports universities' teaching, research, and conference activities. There's an annual call for proposals. The next call should be published momentarily. I believe it's usually on the website, at any rate, of the Directorate General for Education and Culture. And the deadline is typically the 15th of February. Excuse me. As I'd mentioned, it's managed by the Directorate General for Education and Culture. It's a part of the lifelong learning program designed to increase knowledge and awareness of EU integration worldwide. It encourages universities from any country in the world to set up teaching, research, and conference activities on the EU and on relations between the EU and other regions and countries. Three main activities that are promoted by the Jean Monnet program. The Jean Monnet Action is the first one. It stimulates teaching, research, and reflection on European integration in higher education institutions worldwide. The second main objective of the Jean Monnet program is to support 6 specific academic institutions, which wouldn't be of relevance to you here in Canada. And of course, the Jean Monnet program also supports European-wide associations, which are active in education and training. I thought I would mention here that Canada has a very good reputation, again, for Jean Monnet applications. I don't want to misquote the actual statistics, but I understand that maybe out of 70 applications, usually a high percentage are always accepted. I was looking yesterday at the website of the Directorate General for Education and Culture, and I know that they are trying to renew this listing as we speak, because the latest call for proposals was all of the evaluations had been done. So now they're determining who are the new Jean Monnet modules that will be awarded here in Canada. But I am aware that at the moment there are 9 Jean Monnet chairs throughout Canada, and 26 Jean Monnet actions in total. So that includes Jean Monnet chairs, research modules, and maybe other integration studies to support university offerings. This is a project, again, which is probably not well known enough by Canadian universities. We found that a lot of universities in the West are the ones who are applying and who are usually successful for this project. It's not very difficult. The Directorate General of Education and Culture has recommended, advised, encouraged that for newcomers, meaning universities that are interested in getting on into the EU network, the best thing to do is to apply first for a module. Again, it's not a very difficult process. All of it is outlined on the Directorate's website, or I've left some of my business cards there on the table. Anyone with questions can always contact me afterwards and I can point you in the right direction. I'll move on to EU Centers of Excellence. There are 5 of them in Canada, all listed there. In 1998, the European Commission, under the former Directorate General for External Relations, launched this initiative, and it was aimed to provide information and education about the EU. The broad objectives were and still remain to increase awareness about the political, economic, cultural importance of the EU and its foreign policies. Today, the EU Centers of Excellence project continues to be a very successful academic program between the EU and Canada. These centers are supported by the formal EU-Canada agreement in higher education and vocational training, while not necessarily funded by the Education and Culture DG. However, it's an initiative that has contributed greatly to enriching the pool of expertise on EU affairs in Canada. And as I said, there are 5 of them housed in universities here in Canada. The next call for proposals for EU Centers of Excellence will also be launched next year, perhaps towards the second half of next year, to fund activities within these universities for 3 to 4 years at a time. The funding, I think I have the figure here, yes. As I said, it should be for another 3 to 4 year cycle, where grants totaling about 1.5 million, which is about 2.4 million Canadian dollars. So 1.5 million euros, 2.4 million Canadian dollars to fund 4 or 5 centers across Canada. And again, calls for proposals will be announced on the delegation's website and also on the General Europa website. There's a very interesting page only on calls for proposals for EU funding, so that's something to have a look at. Public diplomacy. This is another initiative that we have together with Canada and also with our industrialized countries, partners. This one is managed by, as I had mentioned earlier, the Foreign Policy Instrument of the External Action Service. Proposals were launched in the spring or late fall. I can't recall right now, I'm very sorry. But at any rate, the deadline for this year's activity is passed, and they're now in the process of doing evaluations for these. This program is launched on every other year. Funding for this initiative is about €500,000. This year in particular, very special year, the €500,000 was intended to support activities by one major project. We've done this twice before, once in 2007, once in 2009, and on both of those occasions, the funding was about the same, but the idea was to fund 5 to 7 projects. So this time, it's new and improved and quite different, but at any rate, it has been quite successful. Independent evaluators have recommended that we continue this program, and quite likely another call for proposals will be launched, not next year, but the year after, so 2013, for the Public Diplomacy Initiative. Activities under the Public Diplomacy Initiative are targeted at and should include the participation of the academic community, the media, civil society, non-governmental organizations, business community, etc. And areas of interest that we're always looking at are environment, trade, EU's common foreign security policy, electoral observation. There's a long list of the areas of interest that would be pertinent for these types of applications. And I'll speak about the last program, which is not so much a high level or a high profile one, as I had mentioned. It's the EU-Canada Young Journalist Award. Very small project, though we're quite proud of it. It's 10 years old now, and managed mainly with the delegation's press and information budget, so a very small budget. But the objective is to encourage journalists or budding journalists throughout Canada to write about the EU, to encourage interest, to get more research, and also to publish more on the EU. Each year, students within journalism schools, as well as any student doing any journalistic composition on any area of EU affairs, they're invited to submit a piece. There are specifications on what the piece should look like. 3 winners are chosen, and then they're sent to Europe on a week study tour, all expenses paid. So this is an annual project. It's not a call for proposal, but it will be launched in the spring of next year. And we're always looking forward to getting the word as well passed along for this program. I'll end on that project. I'm sure there are quite a few more, but those are the ones that I wanted to highlight today. And just to also mention that with the ambitions for an enhanced economic and trade relationship, the CETA, the matters of closer collaboration in higher education, facilitation of student and labor mobility, as well as the recognition of competences and credentials are of significant importance to both EU and Canada. The groundwork is being laid or has been laid by the provisions of our cooperation in higher education and training. In the future and in an increasingly demanding global economy, the EU will continue to dialogue with partners like Canada, despite the fact that for the moment, some of our activities have been suspended because funding on the Canadian side was discontinued. But our hope is that post 2013, and certainly when we have a renewed higher education and training agreement, that there will be greater and bigger opportunities, as I had said earlier, for more collaboration. So thank you for listening.